Dragon Ballers, if you're looking to buy Dragon Ball Super or One Piece sealed product, make sure to get 5% off using my link to Mystic TCG down in the description. You can also sell cards to them using their Facebook link, which is also down in the description. Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Early last week, I brought my Android 21 list to the Patreon, and I got a lot of requests for people that wanted to see it here on the YouTube channel, so that's what we're doing today. We're going to take a look at my Android 21 deck profile for the Power Absorbed leader. Now, this is by far the deck that I've been testing the most in set 20, because one, I do actually find it kind of fun, but also besides that, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of hype, even maybe a lot of negative turmoil surrounding this leader. Some people are calling it the most broken deck to come out of the set. Some people are calling it a trash tier deck that's overhyped. I have my own opinions on it after playing it a lot over the past week and a half, probably 2 weeks. So we'll get through all that in the video. I'll explain where I think it kind of fits in the meta, why I think it's strong, where I think it maybe has weaknesses. We'll talk about all that in the video. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to buy any cards for this deck, or any trading cards for that matter, it does greatly help me out if you were to use my link in the description to TCG Player, especially if you want to go ahead and buy an alternate art copy of Android 21 Transcendental Predator, which is the alt art SCR for this deck. If you want to buy that, that would be a really nice kickback for me, and I really would appreciate it. But anyways, enough joking around. Let's go ahead and get into the deck profile. We of course have the leader here. Now, I've heard some discussion pertaining to whether you should play this leader or the OG 21 scheme leader. There is a discussion to be had there. I think that if you want to play a really methodical, much slower paced version of this deck, you want to go ahead and play the OG 21 leader. But I think the main downside there is that you can't use your opponent's cards as energy in any situation. So you are much more kind of living and dying by your ability to ramp. And in some matchups, that is easier said than done. Like if you're in a super aggro matchup, for one, your opponent can start hitting you with clone tokens, but for two, you're not gonna be able to use their battle cards that they invest into the board as a means of playing your bombs, and that is definitely a decent downside. I do also have a build with the OG 21 leader. I haven't tested that one as much. I need to put more time into that one, but I do quite like this leader a lot because of that exact scenario. If your opponent's putting a lot of pressure onto you, you do have their battle cards to use as energy, which in non-blue or green matchups, it only counts as non-specified energy, but you can still make plays with that. Now, that's where this deck feels unfair, is when you're actually up against another blue deck, because their battle cards and unisons immediately just become energy for you, and that does feel like insanely powerful. Against everything else, like mid-range decks that aren't blue or green, it feels, I don't want to say fair, but not necessarily as overwhelming. Although it does always feel insane whenever you can just like tap a blocker to use as energy. That does feel really powerful. But anyways, let's get into the main board here. We are starting off with our super combo split. I am personally playing 3 Vegetas and 1 Zeno Edge of Space. I'm not playing any Android 18 Bionic Blitz or the 17-18 super combo that untaps blue-green energy. This is not really a build that's wanting to arrival. Actually, we really don't want to go into the combo step very often if we can help it. There are niche times, which is where like Zeno comes into play and allows you to tap out for greedier things and feel rather safe about it. But because we are a leader that gets to 4 life very quickly, I just feel like the Vegeta is the best bet for this, especially against those aggro decks. You want to be able to filter through your deck, get dead cards out of your hand, maybe draw into more super combos or floodgates, stuff like that. Then we are playing 2 copies of Mandatory Gathering and 2 copies of Android 18 Speedy Substitution. Now, I don't necessarily recommend you play a 2-2 split of this. I just have this here so I can talk about it. So there's a couple things with each of these cards. For one, Mandatory Gathering obviously comes out with the leader, so there's a lot of, signs pointing you to like, hey, play this card. But there is like somewhat of a downside with it. When you play it, your opponent gets a clone token. Now, you're not giving your opponent nearly as many clone tokens as you are in like the OG 21 build, so they're not going to be able to beat you down with them as frequently. But it can still make the aggro matchups a little bit harder, where you could have taken like 1 free damage if you were at 5 life, but now that damage is being dealt to you by a clone token, so you either combo 5k and straight up lose a card for no reason, or your opponent is just beating you up that much faster. So that's the downside of Mandatory Gathering, as well as the fact that when you combo it from hand, your opponent gets token immediately. So if you are in that situation where your opponent's hitting you with a clone token at your 10k leader and you want to combo 5k to prevent that damage, well, you're giving your opponent another token now, so you just defeated the entire purpose of that. Where Speedy Substitution comes in, it doesn't give your opponent clone tokens, and it actually has better search power because it doesn't have an energy restriction on the android it searches, and being able to search your A drop in this deck is actually a really big deal. That's what's so great about the unawakened side of the leader. and Speedy Sub has the same benefit. Now, the one problem with Speedy Sub is that it doesn't give your opponent a clone token, and in some matchups you want to be giving your opponent those clone tokens because you can use them as non-specific energy. So it really just depends on what matchup you want to hedge for. If you are really afraid against aggro, if your local has a lot of aggro, I would probably go with Speedy Sub. If you're playing a meta or a locals that has a lot of slower decks like mid-range and control of non-blue colors, I'd probably go with Mandatory Gathering, although I'm probably going to try out this 2-2 split for a while and just see how I feel about both of them. Although now that I am cutting Mandatory Gathering down, I am definitely cutting deeper into the clone token generation of the deck, which we will talk more about later. But yeah, this is my thoughts on these two 1-drops. Definitely pros and cons to both. Really depends on what you want to hedge against. Then we of course have 4 copies of Pan, Glimpse of Talent. This card is actually broken in this deck. Like, this gives your opponent blue energy for you to use, and that makes your boss monster playable on like turn 4 in a lot of cases, which is really, really powerful. Then we have 4 copies of Android 21 Total Audacity. This card is extremely unfair in blue matchups. Like, you can literally play this sometimes in a blue matchup for 0 of your own energy and then restand your opponent's cards and then do more things, and that's insane. When you're not up against a blue deck, it's a fine card. It's a Sand Instincts that has a body, a 20k double strike body, and generates you clone tokens. So as we're cutting into the Mandatory Gatherings, this is our main form of clone token generation, which feels okay. It doesn't get as much play in non-blue matchups, obviously, but anytime you have 2 mana to sink to draw 2, and your opponent has 2 battle cards or a Unison in play, it is very, very powerful in that scenario. Then we have 3 copies of Raditz Giant Force. So one of the big things I talked about in that Patreon article was that there are so many different Unisons you can try in this deck now that Boo is limited to 1, which of course we are playing the 1 copy of Boo. But yeah, Unisons I've tried Hit Unison. I love the draw power, but I don't love how it's so vulnerable to Smoke Dragon. I've tried 17-18 Unison, same thing, vulnerability to Smoke, although it does give you a nice little like semi win condition in the form of applying pressure with the 25k dual attack. That is pretty nice as well. My favorite one was probably Baby Unison, although Raditz is a close second purely because of the defensive capability he adds to the deck, giving you the double blocker. It's like the next best defensive Unison to Boo, but only having 3 markers and not gaining any does make it very vulnerable to Red Sin Shenron, which is one of the premier aggro decks of the format in my opinion. So, you know, having this Unison that's probably going to die rather quickly to that matchup, which is one of your worst matchups, is kind of a big deal. Although if they sequence him properly, you can get 1 to 2 blocks out of this Unison. So again, I really think it's all about hedging your bets, and if the format trends towards aggro, maybe not so much like the Sin stuff, but like the Kai of Time, the Gogeta, I think Raditz is actually a really good pick, although I did very much like Baby. I think having a 3-cost Unison to dodge Smoke is the way to go, and you want that Unison to offer you draw power. Tapion is something I was even tinkering with a little bit as well, but I think Baby and Raditz both offer the deck more than Tapion does. But anyways, let's keep on going through. We have 2 copies of Android 18 Let the Battle Begin. Only 2 copies because we're not playing the free play Unison in this deck, which I should probably mention here. I don't think that Unison offers this deck nearly enough upside to consider playing. It's straight up -1 from hand. It has a neat little ability where it can like help you go for game. It gains double strike and some power, but I don't think it offers nearly enough. I want my Unison to be drawing me cards because this leader and this deck can fall behind in hand advantage if you don't establish a method of drawing cards. So besides the fact we're playing a later Unison, I don't think there's actually that many great targets in this format to be hitting with Let the Battle Begin. Like, off the top of my head, you have like Beerus, Area Annihilator, and like the Sin 4-drop if you even get to your Unison in a timely manner against Sin. So I don't think there's too many great targets for this. You could maybe side deck 1 to 2 more copies depending on matchup, of course. It could be good against some rogue stuff, but yeah, still solid card to pair up with your Unisons. Then we have 4 copies of Android 18 Measureless Strength and 4 copies of Full Power Counter. These are our check lands. These both charge, ignoring energy exhaust, which is great. Full Power Counter is obviously a pretty strong floodgate. I mean, it costs 4, but you can always use one of your opponent's cards as energy, especially if they sequence improperly. So maximum it's costing you 3, and man, if you ever play against a blue deck that just has like an established board, this card is absolutely nuts. But yeah, this card is really good. It doesn't actually negate the attack, but it actually does pop something ignoring barrier, giving it usage on both players' turns. Now in this build, I am not playing the Android 21 counterplay. It's a mono blue card, it's a 4-drop. I don't remember the name, but I'm not playing that card. I would consider sideboarding it, however, because I think it is probably pretty strong against other blue decks where you can just like literally counterplay them with it as they're playing certain things with skills. But outside of that, it doesn't end my opponent's turn in other matchups, so I don't think it's worth playing in the main board personally. Then we have 4 copies of Android 21 Ceaseless Despair. This card feels excellent to play 4 copies of. Normally you wouldn't play 4 copies of a boss monster, but it is a 0 energy 10k combo in this deck, and it's just an insane bomb. Board wipe, if they negate, they pitch 2 cards. There are things you have to be careful about with this card though, and this is why I don't think this deck is anywhere near like tier 0. It is very, very weak to the cunning cards, which are on top of everyone's mind right now because of last format, as well as this deck if people are trying to figure out ways to beat it. So you won't get your untapped 5 for free if your opponent plays a cunning card. That is actually a really big deal. That really makes a huge difference whether you're tapping out for this card or you know, just basically paying 0 for it, because typically you'll pay 5 of your own energy and use 3 of your opponent's battle cards, you know, combination of their cards, clone tokens, whatever the case is. But yeah, having a tap out for this versus not tapping out for this is a really big deal. Makes this card a lot harder to play if people are prepared for this deck, but still, I mean, it is just an insane bomb nonetheless. Then we of course have the SCR for this deck. Easily the best SCR for this deck. Like, you play this card for 2 in this deck because you're using 2 of your opponent's cards as the non-specific energy and then your own blue and green. There, it's pretty funny, in some mirror matches I played this for 0 energy, so yeah, this card is absolutely ridiculous in this deck. Very, very strong. Then we have 2 copies of Goku Black Mortals Be Gone and 2 copies of Gohan Power Reclaimed. So during our own turn, we cannot play battle cards by skills. However, we are allowed to do that during our opponent's turn. That's where these cards come in. Now, Power Reclaimed is best paired with Ceaseless Despair. You only ever want to try to play for Power Reclaimed if you've successfully untapped 5 with your boss monster. Again, if people are more prepared for this card and not allowing us to untap 5, Power Reclaim gets a lot worse in this deck. But Mortals Be Gone is always pretty solid. It's not too hard to leave up 1 to 2 energy and then just hit your opponent with a battle trick. And we do set up a fair amount of Z energy in this deck, even though I said we don't want to be comboing too much. We of course have our super combos. We of course have our cantrips that we will combo off to Z energy. So that's not too bad. And we're only playing 2 copies because, again, they're only playable during our opponent's turn, not during our own turn. Then we have 1 copy of Golden Avenger. Again, not playable during your own turn via counter, but you can still use the counter skill and stop whatever counter you're countering. Man, say counter 10 times fast. But yeah, you can still counter, you just can't play the card. But during your opponent's turn, this is actually a really solid counterplay against like ramp mirror matches that play SS4 Vegeta Rise of the Super Warrior. You can hit them with this. This hits you know, a whole bunch of cards out there that your opponent may not see coming if you just have 5 open energy and they're not expecting it, because typically 21 decks haven't been able to play this card because the old ramp support doesn't allow you to play 30k battle cards. That's no longer a problem with the current configuration of this main deck. Then we have 4-Dimension Magic. I am not playing Unstoppable Technique. I was playing Unstoppable Technique at first, but then I just valued the extra energy over the untap 1. Yes, Unstoppable Technique makes a clone token, and yes, I am cutting deep into this deck's ability to make a clone token. But the way I see it is, if your opponent's playing a deck that's putting a lot of pressure onto you, they're going to be playing a ton of battle cards anyway. If they're not, you have all the time in the world to set up, and then you don't even mind tapping out for Ceaseless Despair later in the game if you have to. And you can ramp more than once in a slow paced game. It's just like the decks that actually play a bunch of battle cards to try to, you know, aggro you down. Those are the ones where you want to be using their battle cards as energy, and they're giving you the battle cards to do that. So I don't necessarily mind cutting too deep into the clone token generation aspect of the deck. Then we have 2 copies of Dirty Burst. You need it for the mirror match, you need it for SCRs. It's just that good in blue, we all know that. 2 copies of Desperate Measures. For a while this was absolute release ball, but that card is not good in the mirror match because you can't use it above 4 life. And in the mirror match, you want to be stopping your opponent's 2-cost ramp from their Z deck, and this card allows you to do that. And the final card, we have 4 copies of Android 17 Defending Friends. So between full power counter, we want to be floodgating our opponent or blocking attacks with our unisons as often as physically possible. We're not playing Senzu Bean, we're not playing combo tricks besides Goku Black and Power Reclaimed. We're not playing pseudo combos. So we want to just be negating attacks and floodgating our opponent. Now let's go take a look at the Z deck. Currently, I have 2 copies of Android 21 in the Name of Peace with 2 copies of Name of Hunger. The reason I'm playing 2 copies of Name of Peace is for the same reason I talked about with Desperate Measures. Our opponent can technically interrupt this to where we'd want to replay another copy the next turn, potentially. So that's why I have 2 copies of this. If I wasn't so afraid of that, I'd probably only play 1. And then, like, later on in the game, if I'm going to play Name of Hunger, I would just play it for 4 out of my Z deck. But typically, this is always your turn 2 play, so whether you go first or second, you want to make a Z energy. Typically, like, by defending an attack would be ideal. so you can use your life on your Unawakened side to take more life and search more cards. That would be ideal, but yeah, however you have to do it, just do it. And then 1 Beerus Area Annihilator, 1 Goku Stronger Together, and 1 Awakening of the Created. I could see maybe making room for 5-drop Vegito in this deck, but again, like tapping out for that card on 5 would be a little bit rough. So I don't know about that one quite yet, but I've liked the Z deck a lot so far. But yeah, that's my list, guys. Just let me know in the comments below what you think. Again, I don't think this is like a tier 0 deck. I don't think it's a trash tier deck. I think it's very, very good. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.